From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. It was an action-packed week in Alabama government and politics. Let's get right to it. This week's biggest legislative development is the passage of a bill that will reshape the governance structure of the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs. The legislation was prompted by last year's messy interagency dispute that eventually led to the dismissal of the department's commissioner. Governor Kay Ivey and legislative leaders want to change how the department and its board operates, but the bill faced some hurdles along the way to final passage. Capitol Journal's Jeff Sanders has that story.
57 ayes, 39 nays, SB 67 has passed.
And with that vote, Senate Bill 67 cleared its final hurdle in the Alabama legislature. The legislation, sponsored by Republican Senator Andrew Jones and carried in the House by Representative Ed Oliver, makes significant changes to the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs. It elevates the ADVA commissioner to a cabinet-level position with direct oversight by the governor, while shifting the State Board of Veterans Affairs into more of an advisory role.
Has access to all the governor's team and cabinet as a cabinet official, him or herself. That's essential to moving us forward and becoming the most veteran-friendly state in the United States.
Governor Ivey championed the legislation following her decision last year to fire former Commissioner Kent Davis. In a statement on social media, the governor praised the bill's passage, saying in part, "Alabama's 400,000 veterans deserve our very best, and we are well on our way to being the #1 state for veterans." But not everyone supports the overhaul. Among the critics, former Commissioner Davis, who has spoken out against the changes.
Why is that important? It's important for this bill, but it's important for all of our rights. These are men and women who have served their country, sometimes at great risk, sometimes giving their life for this country.
The bill also faced pushback on the House floor before the final vote.
There are a lot of veterans throughout the districts. And this bill, I'm just saying, now that I'm getting the clarity on it, I don't know enough about it. With that many of those organizations that you named against this, listen, however y'all got the votes, if you got it.
And in the end, they did. With final passage secured, Governor Ivey notches another key legislative win. Reporting from the State House in Montgomery, I'm Jeff Sanders for Capitol Journal.
It was a busy week in the Alabama House of Representatives as major legislation on crime and immigration were on the move. That led to long and sometimes heated debates in the lower chamber. Capitol Journal's Randy Scott reports.
All eyes are on Senate Bill 55, which deals with having proper documentation while driving in Alabama. Senator Chris Elliott explains it during this committee meeting.
That the state of Alabama is not going to recognize licenses that are issued if the non-resident license explicitly indicates that it was issued to an individual who did not exercise the option of providing proof of lawful presence in the United States when obtaining a license.
The House Public Safety and Homeland Security Committee approves Senate Bill 55. Meanwhile, some lawmakers are looking for ways to expand their proposals to continue the repeal on the tax for overtime pay in Alabama.
But we need to make these things a priority for working families. And then we certainly still are very much in favor of gaming, a comprehensive gaming package, which we think would help to fill any voids that might be caused as a result of reducing the taxes that we've mentioned.
On the House floor, House Bill 202 was the focus of attention. The proposal deals with new guidelines for law enforcement officer immunity.
It clearly describes that an officer is still liable if he operates outside the scope of his duties, if he operated recklessly. It's very clear language. And on the criminal side, we're simply saying, hey, let's pause and let a judge of jurisdiction decide, did this officer operate within the scope of his duties, or was he reckless and outside of that? If he's ruled that he was, that criminal proceeding continues to go.
We all want to make sure that our law enforcement agents have whatever they need. They are equipped with whatever they need to actually protect and serve all 5 million people in the state of Alabama. That's the premise that we're starting with. The concern that I have is for the everyday person. to make sure that we do not include or put procedural hurdles, barriers in their way in order for them to receive any type of relief.
With bipartisan efforts, House Bill 202 is approved. At the Alabama State House, Randy Scott, Capitol Journal.
Some breaking news on the issue of medical marijuana. The Alabama Court of Civil Appeals has tossed out a lawsuit that had stalled the licensing process for cannabis products in the state. The court lifted a temporary restraining order that had prevented the Alabama Medical Cannabis Commission from moving forward with issuing business licenses. The lawsuit was brought by Alabama Always and other companies that were denied licenses. They argued that the selection process was flawed, but the appeals court ruled that the Montgomery Circuit Court did not have the authority, at least not for now, to step in. The state approved medical cannabis back in 2021, but licensing has been plagued with missteps, do-overs, and legal battles. Following the decision, the Alabama Medical Cannabis Commission said in a statement, "On behalf of the many long-suffering patients in Alabama who have waited far too long for access to the benefits of medical cannabis products, we are pleased with today's decision from the Alabama Court of Civil Appeals. We are hopeful that this decision will remove the obstacles that have prevented the Commission from completing the license process and doing the work the law charged it to do." We'll get back to state legislative business in a bit, but right now we turn to Washington, where partisan divides were on full display as President Donald Trump addressed a joint session of Congress. Alabama's delegation in Washington was also divided in their responses to the speech, with Republicans praising the president and Democrats condemning him. Capitol Journal's Alex Engel reports from Capitol Hill.
America is back.
Starkly different reactions came from each side of the chamber during President Donald Trump's Tuesday night speech to Congress. Alabama's GOP members were full of praise.
He's making good on his campaign promises.
Democrats had the opposite response.
The president spent nearly an hour and a half talking about everything but solutions to the high cost of living here in America.
Trump touched on the need to cut taxes and touted his border policies. He praised the Department of Government Efficiency's efforts aimed at slashing the federal government. That's something Congressman Mike Rogers says stood out to him.
When Trump spent so much time listing examples of what most objective people would think was wasteful spending or inappropriate, I thought that was impactful.
Congressman Robert Adderholt says even though there has been some confusion on what exactly DOJ is targeting, such as local Social Security offices, he thinks it will ultimately be helpful to address the debt.
I would say to hold back, to let's see what's going on, and if there are some things that are done incorrectly, then the airline has himself said that they'll be corrected, and I know the president will back him up.
But Congresswoman Terry Sewell says these actions are harming federal workers in Alabama. She brought a Birmingham Social Security employee, Chelsea Lyons, with her as her guest to Tuesday's speech. Lyons described the fear federal workers have been feeling these past few weeks.
We are traumatized. We are devastated. The work that we do, all of us, is mission critical work.
Trump also defended his use of tariffs, some of which are now paused for a month. Congressman Gary Palmer says those tariffs in the end should be beneficial as Trump uses them as a negotiating tool.
It'll be a little bit of a bumpy road on the front end, but he thinks that things are really going to work out well for the American people on the back end, and I think that's fair.
During his address, the president touched on his desire to create a missile defense shield named the Golden Dome. Rogers says Alabama will play a critical role in creating that.
A Golden Dome type defense system will be very economically beneficial for Alabama, particularly North Alabama.
The speech lasted for 99 minutes, the longest ever. Congress will have to pass a continuing resolution next week by the deadline of March 14th to ensure the government does not run out of funding, setting up those partisan divides in that fight once again. Reporting on Capitol Hill, Alex Engel, Capitol Journal.
U.S. Senator Tommy Tuberville made some big headlines this week. The former Auburn coach and Alabama's senior senator for months has been rumored to be a potential candidate for governor in 2026. That's the year that most expected Tuberville to run for re-election to the U.S. Senate. But this week, Tuberville confirmed to our own Alex Engel that he is indeed considering a run for the state's top job. Tuberville said he hasn't made up his mind yet and that it would be difficult to leave the current Republican majority in Congress, but that the governor's office does interest him. He said, quote, "If you're the CEO of a state, then you can help more in a certain amount of time. I'm not going to be up here forever, even if I do stay." Tuberville went on to say that he has not yet talked about the prospect with President Donald Trump, but he has discussed it with his Senate colleagues. He also said he's been encouraged by supporters to run. There is an open race for governor, as current Governor Kay Ivey is term limited. Others who have discussed a run for the state's top job include Lieutenant Governor Will Ainsworth, who has said he won't make an announcement until after the session, and Agriculture Commissioner Rick Pate, who said he hasn't ruled out a run. Speaking of Tuberville, he had legislation on the Senate floor this week that would prevent trans athletes from competing in women's sports. That bill was blocked from moving forward as senators voted along party lines 51 to 45. 60 votes were needed to advance it. The legislation would categorize gender under Title IX as based solely on a person's reproductive biology and genetics at birth. President Trump has already issued an executive order reversing the Biden administration's reinterpretation of Title IX that allowed for transgender athletes to compete in women and girls sports. But Tuberville said a law is needed to make the policy permanent.
You know, I sat up last night trying to think of a word to describe what happened yesterday to girls and women across this country. I still hadn't come up with it. Amazing to me that anybody would be against girls and women's sports. But that's what happened yesterday. For the third time since I've been here, going on 5 years. I spent all my life in coaching. And the best thing that's ever happened to women and women's sports is Title IX. Well, folks, it's being attacked, and attacked daily by the Democrats. There is no reason why that should not have been a 100-0 vote. It makes no sense. It really doesn't. And I want you to look at this. Women's sports is being attacked. Men and women's sports, the Democrats say there's only a few. Well, it doesn't take but one to injure somebody. Again, I've spent my entire life watching competition, and this is a no-nonsense vote of voting for girls and women.
Several members of Congress are in Selma this weekend, marking the 60th anniversary of Bloody Sunday. Congresswoman Terry Sewell led a bipartisan delegation of her colleagues to visit Selma and participate in multiple commemorative events leading up to the bridge crossing on Sunday. Sewell was joined by Congressman Jim Clyburn of South Carolina and Byron Donald of Florida, along with several others, at the base of the Edmund Pettus Bridge to speak of the courage of the late John Lewis and so many other foot soldiers who were beaten and brutalized in their efforts to shine a light on voter discrimination in Selma and throughout the South.
Well, 60 years ago today, very brave, known and unknown foot soldiers. Everybody knows about Hosea Williams and John Lewis, but there were 60 people behind them. And they marched across this bridge so that every American has equal access to the ballot box. And this democracy only works when all of us who are Americans have an opportunity to vote. And the fact that John in his lifetime saw the Voting Rights Act of 1965 be signed into law, standing behind President Lyndon Baines Johnson, and that 5 years ago he passed away, still making sure that this country remembers what happened in Selma, and that Selma is not just back then, Selma is now.
As I reflect today on my long life and relationship with John Lewis, who I met when we were 19-year-old college students, we sat on the back row on the floor of the House of Representatives and reflect for a little bit on our early lives together. And I shall never forget John saying to me that he saw and felt things developing around us that were threats to what we had accomplished in the 50s and 60s. And I know today that John foretold what we are currently experiencing.
The bridge that is over my shoulder is something that we saw videos of, pictures of, clips of. It was seared into my mind as a young kid. So to be here today to commemorate the 60th anniversary of Bloody Sunday is quite special to me because I learned so much about it as a young man. I'm also honored to bring my 13-year-old son, my youngest son, here with me so that he could learn some of the history that I learned when I was growing up. But I think it's important for all of us to know and acknowledge that the sacrifices that were made by those foot soldiers here, by John Lewis, who I did not have the honor to serve with, but recognize his sacrifices, recognize his leadership, and honor that leadership, that it is upon that heavy burden and it is upon that work that all of us here have an ability to stand and to advocate and to represent and to lead in the United States of America.
We'll be right back with more coverage from the Alabama legislature.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capitol Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capitol Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capitol Journal podcasts. Keep up with what's happening with Capitol Journal.
Alabama Public Television is your place for quality educational services. Free professional development for educators and child care providers. Access to free curriculum-aligned videos, lesson plans, and instructional resources with PBS Learning Media. And all the PBS Kids programs parents know and trust. Learn something new every day with Alabama Public Television. Visit us at aptv.org/education to learn more.
Back to our coverage of the Alabama legislature, where a plan to provide paid parental leave for public school employees and state workers took a big step forward this week. The Senate took up and passed Senate Bill 199 from Senator Vivian Figures. It would grant up to 8 weeks of paid parental leave for new mothers and 2 weeks for new fathers. Figures brought up similar legislation last year, but this time the bill is gaining momentum with the backing from Governor Kay Ivey and support from the Alabama Education Association. After a successful 28-3 vote, Figures said this legislation is long overdue and that she was thankful for the bipartisan support it received.
It was very, very exciting. It was heartwarming. It was humbling. I truly appreciated all of the 23 co-sponsors from the other senators. It felt like it was a team effort. It was definitely the right thing to do. And I had no idea that that wasn't already in place in the state of Alabama. And I have to give kudos to my son, Congressman Shamari Figures, because he found out about this issue while on the campaign trail last year. And I immediately said yes. I'm very proud to have the governor in great support of this bill. So it's very important that that woman has that support. It's also a time that she gets to spend with the father, and they can bond. The father can help out in a lot of ways. So I'm very happy that we were able to get the fathers in. Also for women who have miscarriages. And one of the problems was with some of the senators was that they wanted to make sure that they wouldn't be getting leave for an abortion. So I said, fine, let's put the language in there and make it very clear. So women who are 12 weeks or more and have a miscarriage, because they too go through a time of healing, particularly mentally.
That bill now moves to the House for consideration. In the House, lawmakers took up a bill that would ban the use of cell phones in Alabama classrooms. Dubbed the Focus Act, House Bill 166 from State Representative Lee Holsey would prohibit the use of cell phones of any kind during the instructional school day, sometimes called bell to bell. It would also require local school boards to adopt internet safety policies that address students' access to the internet on school computers. Lawmakers got a late start to the debate, and because of that, there were so many questions about it, and the House voted to carry it over to bring it back another day. Halsey said she remains confident the bill will ultimately pass.
This is something, truthfully, that I have been researching for well over a year now. And the data and there's a lot of data out there, but the data that was out there about how cell phones are negatively impacting our students in school when it comes to their academic performance and just their overall well-being and their mental health is really quite alarming, if I'm honest with you. So after seeing those things, I really felt like I couldn't in good conscience not do something to address the issue. There is a Montgomery school that has been implementing a 2-year pilot program. They spoke last year at our committee meeting, and then we followed back up with them this year because we felt like we didn't necessarily need to have them come back because the information was so good last year. But we did want to give some updated information from them. But essentially, their academic performance it's skyrocketed for the kids. But I think equally impressive is their discipline numbers have gone down over 80%. And when I say that, referrals to the Office for Discipline. So having to leave the classroom, not be able to stay in the classroom, learn, continue to focus on what you're really there to do. Over 80%, and that's a fabulous statistic. That's what we want to see. That's exactly what we're looking for.
The House also passed legislation banning so-called Glock switches. Machine gun conversion devices are already illegal under federal law, but Alabama officials say a state ban is needed to allow local and state law enforcement to crack down on these dangerous weapons.
A normal pistol with a Glock switch turns it into a very dangerous, uncontrollable machine gun, and they've been used in mass shootings throughout our state. They've taken precious lives. So by passing this ban, we're hoping to save some lives moving forward and have safer communities for everyone.
That bill passed 77 to 23. It must now go back to the Senate because of alterations made in the House. There was lots of action in committee this week. We'll start in the Senate Judiciary Committee, where lawmakers advanced a bill allowing prosecutors to seek the death penalty for those convicted of first-degree rape or sodomy of a child under 12. Under current law, first-degree rape and sodomy are Class A felonies, punishable by up to life in prison without parole. House Bill 49 is sponsored by State Representative Matt Simpson, who used to prosecute such cases and says the death penalty option is needed. During a committee hearing, Democratic senators opposing the bill emphasized that their objections stem from opposing the death penalty itself rather than the bill's intent.
It was originally filed under the age of 6. There was a bipartisan amendment that moved it to 12.
And if I remember correctly, looking at that vote count in the House, I think it was somewhere around 99 to nothing or somewhere.
I think it was 93 to 7. Most of the people that were opposed came and spoke as being opposed to the death penalty in general, not opposed to the bill for the purpose of what it does.
From an emotional standpoint and from how I would feel, the punishment meets the crime. But from a practical purpose, the punishment don't match the crime. I mean, because it's death.
I will have to vote no, but I did want to go on the record as saying, because you know how I feel about our children and about protecting them and the laws that I have sponsored and have passed on their behalf. So I thank you for bringing this with the heart to make sure people pay that penalty for doing such a terrible crime against our children, but I can't vote for the death penalty.
That would be something that the jury could make the determination as to whether or not they impose death or not. But, that's a factor for, it still has all the same defenses if you don't have the mental incapacity for those things. It's the same way as you would. There's no additional defenses through there. It doesn't take those defenses away.
That bill passed out of committee by a vote of 7-3 with 1 abstention, and it now goes to the full Senate for consideration. New tax cut legislation was introduced this week. State Representative Danny Garrett has 4 bills: accelerating the grocery tax cut to take another penny off the state sales tax on groceries, allowing local governments to also reduce their sales tax on groceries, doubling the state's exemptions for withdrawals from defined contribution retirement plans, and increasing the threshold for optional standard deductions and dependent exemptions. In all, Garrett estimates the bills would amount to about $315 million in tax cuts.
HB 388, and you'll recall several years ago we had exempted the first $6,000 per person or $12,000 per couple for people over age 65 who were making withdrawals from a defined contribution retirement plan. What this bill would do would be to double that, increase that exemption from $6,000 to $12,000 per person, or from $12,000 to $24,000 per couple. House Bill 389 is a bill that would do several things. It would change the increase the adjusted gross income threshold floor to claim the $1,000 dependent exemption from $50,000 to $60,000. It would increase the AGI threshold cap to claim the existing $500 dependent exemption from $100,000 to $120,000. It would increase the AGI floor to claim the optional standard deduction for taxpayers that are married, filing jointly, or head of family from $25,500 to $28,000. So in total, these tax bills have a fiscal note of about $191.2 million of a tax reduction for the citizens.
Those bills were approved by the House Education Budget Committee and now go to the full House. And I'll speak with Mr. Garrett in more detail about these bills later in the show. The Senate Education Policy Committee met this week considering legislation concerning the 10 Commandments in Alabama schools. Senate Bill 166 from State Senator Keith Kelly would require that the 10 Commandments be displayed in common areas of all K-12 schools and colleges. During a public hearing on the bill, there was both strong support and passionate opposition expressed by citizens. Supporters argue that the 10 Commandments go beyond religion, serving as a foundation for legal principles throughout history. But opponents say the government has no place in promoting religious beliefs, and they raise the novel question, which version of the 10 Commandments would be displayed?
Especially in the countries like the United States, the principles of the 10 Commandments have influenced the development of laws that govern society, prohibition of murder, theft, so on and so forth. In cultural aspects, art and literature, social aspects and movements, for example, Martin Luther King in his work for civil rights invoked the themes from the commandments such as justice, equality, drawing parallels between commandments to fight for human dignity.
There are two different versions of the 10 Commandments found within the scriptures, Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5, and that is 300 to 400 words that whoever wrote this bill summarized and made a decision distinct of that. We believe that it's up to faith communities and faith leaders to interpret Scripture, and to each individual to interpret Scripture as part of their personal faith journey. But it is not the government's place nor the place of public schools to discern which words from the 10 Commandments are important enough to put on a poster.
No vote was taken on that bill following the public hearing. It will likely come back up when the committee meets again. This week marked 1 year since the enactment of a law to protect in vitro fertilization treatments. It came in the wake of an Alabama Supreme Court ruling that interpreted Alabama's Constitution to say that frozen embryos are considered children under state law. That ruling forced IVF providers to halt all treatments for fear of liability. That prompted state lawmakers to pass a law offering immunity to IVF providers and prospective parents. But advocates say the work may not be done.
The law we passed was a short-term solution, which has already been challenged in court. We anticipate more legal challenges to come. This is why we need a constitutional amendment that would protect the right to IVF in our state. We know this is a longer-term battle, and that work starts today. We also know there has been lots of discussion about regulating IVF, which would be harmful to our families. Burdensome regulations would increase cost and risk and would push families that could afford it to seek IVF services in other states. We are here today to push back against those conversations. But while we know we still have lots to do, it's important on this 1-year anniversary to pause and to celebrate and to say thank you.
I think IVF is pro-life as it gets. It creates families across our state, and what's happened in just the past year with over 400 pregnancies and hundreds of children being born is a blessing. And I don't think there's any question about it. God has created IVF for families that needed it. So we certainly appreciate everybody's efforts. It takes everybody to make it happen. It was a group effort.
I'm here today as a mother because of fertility treatment. My son is here today because of the care and the expertise of my doctors and the access that I had to treatment in Alabama. Recently, my husband and I went through another transfer, one that was only possible because of the immunity bill that was passed. And while that transfer ended in heartbreak, we still have hope. We have 4 embryos remaining, each one representing a chance to continue growing our family. Without the immunity bill, my clinic would still be unable to perform these vital services, and for that I am grateful.
I spoke to Corinne O'Brien, the lead organizer of the IVF advocacy group, earlier this week on Capitol Journal. You can catch that interview by going to our Capitol Journal YouTube channel. Well, it wouldn't be a legislative session if the issue of gambling wasn't in the news. In the Senate this week, there were early whispers about gambling legislation resurfacing. You might remember that last year it was the House that passed a comprehensive gambling bill, which included everything from sports betting and a lottery to Class 3 Vegas-style casinos. However, that bill faced significant opposition in the Senate, where it ultimately failed. Despite Republicans holding a supermajority in both the House and Senate, such a bill will likely require support from Democrats to move forward. We spoke with Senate Minority Leader Bobby Singleton to get his take on the prospects of a new gambling bill, its chances of gaining Democratic support, and where he believes the financial proceeds should be directed.
You know, it's still looking at trying to bring in sports wagering, a lottery, and some kind of a gaming, at which level, whether it would be Class 2 or Class 3, whichever we think that we can get past. You know, I don't think all of this money need to go to roads and bridges. I think that we have a lot of things going on. The federal government takes care of a lot of our roads and our bridges, but yet and still, we got Medicaid that need money. We need to do some more health care and rural health care, save some of our hospitals. I think there's a lot of places that money can go before we go to road and bridges. And I don't have a problem with some of it going to road and bridges, but that does not need to dominate where the dollars go. And until, you know, me and my party see it, we can't commit to vote for it until we see it.
As lawmakers prepare for their first break of the legislative session, Senate President Pro Tem Garland Gudger is reflecting on what senators have accomplished so far. Several key bills have advanced through the Senate, tackling issues ranging from public safety to veterans affairs. And there have been some hiccups along the way, including last week when a Democratic filibuster killed an entire legislative day. For now, though, he says he's pleased with the progress made so far in the upper chamber.
Proud of what we've done. Everything has been smooth running so far. We've got a lot of bills out on both sides of the aisle, but it's what's best for the state of Alabama. So we're proud of where we are and the accomplishments that we've achieved so far. Everyone, especially with the softball game this week, has kind of come together, and that kind of relieves a little bit of pressure and stress as we kind of fight back and forth. And so by doing that, we just wanted to make sure we had a good, solid week and get a lot of non-controversial bills out of the way, and we achieved that goal of doing that this week. You know, we have constituent work week next week, so we're going to be in our districts, making sure we go through our own districts and taking care of the constituents that we have there. But when we get back, the main focus is going to be sunset bills. We have 5 days to get those out of the basket and run through committee, then back onto the floor to vote on. So there's 25 of those, and we have to focus on those to get those out.
While heated debates are common on the floors of the House and Senate, this week, lawmakers blew off some steam on the playing field. The 4th annual Battle of Goat Hill charity softball game took place at Montgomery's Riverwalk Stadium, where the House and Senate squared off for bragging rights. House members entered the game riding high after securing their first ever win last year, but that momentum was short-lived. The Senate dominated from the start and never looked back, bolstered in part by some high-profile ringers, if you will, former Braves pitcher Tim Hudson and former Alabama quarterback Brody Croyle. The final score, Senate 14, House 4. Beyond the friendly competition, the event raised more than $76,000 for Big Oak Ranch and the Tallapoosa Girls Ranch. Senator Jabo Wagoner took home MVP honors, not bad at the age of 88. And this week on the Senate floor, House members had to make the dreaded walk of shame, returning the Battle of Goat Hill trophy to the upper chamber.
I stand here as a man who wins or losses, I'll stand here with a smile on my face. It was a good game last night, so congratulations on y'all's victory. I'm still looking over the rules for possibly a debate on the floor on that.
Trying to tell y'all in the past that this belongs to us. It's never was yours. You're just bringing it back home. So we thank you for bringing back what is ours. It should never have gone, and it would never leave again.
You see my smile a little bit bigger when you said that anyway, so anytime that we win, you know, it shows our dominance up here in the Senate, so we're proud of that. Anytime we can do athletic and on the floor and win, obviously everybody wants to be around the winners and the trophy that's right out there on the floor, so we're proud of that, and we're proud of the effort that everyone gave last night on the field, so thank you for that.
And that's the week that was in Alabama government and politics. When we come back, I'll sit down with State Representative Danny Garrett to talk about those tax cut bills and other legislative issues. Stay with us.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the online video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page.
You're watching Alabama Public Television, celebrating 70 years of service to Alabama.
Welcome back to Capitol Journal. Joining me next is State Representative Danny Garrett, Chairman of the House Education Budget Committee. Mr. Chairman, welcome back to Capitol Journal.
Thank you. Always good to be here with you.
Well, we'll talk about the education budget in just a minute. We'll get to that. Always a big topic. But right now we're talking tax cuts. You have filed multiple bills dealing with tax cuts this week. Let's start with the grocery tax. That was it's been an issue for decades, really, but action taken on it in recent years. Let's start there with what your bill does and then go through your tax legislation.
Sure. So, a couple of years ago, we passed a 50% reduction in the state grocery tax. And we did 1% out of the gate the first year. And then the bill stated that the next 1% would happen when revenue grew 3.5%. That didn't happen last year. It's not probably going to happen this year. So one of the decisions we made in this bill was to accelerate that 1% effective this year, September 1st. So we'll have the second half of the 50% reduction immediately. That brings that forward.
Okay. The reason it didn't happen is you put some guardrails in place, making sure revenue has to be at a certain point. But there were so many other tax pieces of tax legislation that the revenue kind of got interrupted a little bit.
Yeah. Some of the things we had done was basically setting up an obstacle for that growth to happen. So
is this kind of taking care of that?
It's taking care of that. So we're going and accelerating that. This is broader. That everybody who pays grocery tax will benefit from this. So that was good. It affects a lot of people. So that's that bill. We also have filed a bill that would remove the limitation for the municipals, the county and locals, to reduce their grocery tax. In the previous legislation, kind of at the request of the league and the county commissioners, we set up a guardrail where they could reduce their tax 0.25%, 25% a year, so long as their revenue grew 2%. And we're basically removing that and saying, locals, if you want to reduce your tax by any amount, whenever you want to do it, just do it. So that's another bill we filed today. Another bill we filed was a bill to double the exemption for people over age 65 who are making withdrawals from a retirement account that's a defined contribution plan, so a 401k, an IRA. A couple of years ago, we set a limit of exemption of $6,000 per person, $12,000 a couple. That would be tax-free. In Alabama, if you have money withdrawn from a defined benefit plan, a pension plan, that's not taxed, but defined contribution plans are taxable. So we exempted the first $6,000 per individual, first $12,000 per couple. We're doubling that. So now, under this bill, you would have $12,000 per individual, $24,000 per couple, and that $24,000 per couple will hit a significant portion of our retired population. And then the final bill we're dropping was the one that would increase the threshold to achieve the standard deduction and the dependency exemptions for taxpayers who are make $60,000 or less. So that'll be a tax reduction primarily focused on that group. So those are 4 tax cuts that all together are about $192 million. When you look at the previous grocery tax, that's over $200 million. Altogether, this is about $315 million in tax cuts.
Yeah, I was adding it up. I was told there would be no math, but yeah, $315 million all told if these bills make it through and become law. That's real money. What's interesting about that number is, to me, it's pretty close to what the overtime income tax cut that was passed a couple of years ago. It was underestimated what that would be in terms of draw on the revenue. It was a $30 million budget estimate. Of course, we understand that that budget they didn't really. It's never been tried before, but it ended up being quite a bit more. So let me ask you, what happens with that? Because with that overtime tax cut, income tax cut, the way it was written, it's set to sunset or expire this year. Is this written in a way that allows for that and maybe make it up in other places?
Well, we've consistently for the past several years been reducing taxes. We've been doing things kind of strategically and I think with a scalpel, but we've been nicking away and reducing taxes. We've had over $1.5 billion in tax reductions, tax cuts, tax exemptions since 2017. Now, with the overtime, you're right. When you filed that bill, which we did, we had an 18-month sunset on it. The fiscal note was $30 million. That was the expectation. It turns out it's going to be about $300 million, and that's a surprise to everyone. People are wondering, why did we miss it so much? Well, I think the problem was we didn't have any data that really to calculate those numbers, so the revenue estimators did the best they could with the information they had, but it's a miss of 10 times. And when you look at how it is spread among individually, it's not that impactful individually when you break that all down to the individual, but it's a significant number of the budget. And we sunset things so we can evaluate programs. If I had known 2 years ago that this was a $300 million fiscal note, we would have looked to do other things. We probably would not have looked at this one because no state has ever done this. And the president last night mentioned that he wants to do this at federal level. We'll have to see how that sorts out. But you sunset so you can evaluate the effectiveness of programs. And the fact is, this is just one that hits a very narrow group of people, but it's significant to the budget. So we felt like we'll continue to evaluate overtime going forward, and certainly if the federal overtime provision passes, that'll be an impetus for us to even look further. But in the meantime, what can we do that would be broader across more Alabamians? And so everybody pays grocery tax. The retirees on fixed incomes don't benefit from overtime. Most of the people paying grocery tax don't benefit from the overtime exemption. So the other things we've done were, maybe to account for that. But in order for overtime to continue, we'd have to have another bill introduced, or it'd have to be extended. And at this point, I think we need to just evaluate it. And we're going to continue to do tax cuts as we go forward. In our committee right now, we have a number of tax exemptions, tax credits, things that we'll evaluate. But we wanted to first decide how this would play out before we really address those.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right that if the price tag on the overtime income tax cut was $300 million, or $330 or whatever it was, it ended up being. If that was the true fiscal note on that bill, I don't think it gets out of committee.
No, well, the analogy I've used, it may be a poor analogy, but we've been in a period where real estate prices have been so high. So let's just go back 2 years ago and say your insurance agent came to you and said, you're underinsured. The replacement value of your home is more than you've got insurance for. Well, how much is it going to cost me to catch up? Well, I'm not sure, but probably about $5,000. So you say, okay, you sign the paperwork, he goes and gets insurance, and he comes back 3 months later and say, by the way, I was wrong, it's $50,000. Well, you would have made a different decision had you had that. And I think part of being fiscally responsible is looking to say, okay, we took a chance on this issue. We had a sunset period, which is appropriate. That's another thing we've done in the past several years since Republicans have taken over the legislature. We've sunset these things so that we can evaluate the effectiveness and the cost and the benefit of programs.
Yeah. And that's fair enough, but you're going to have plenty of people out there that might see it as a tax increase, right? Fairly or unfairly, you may be accused of that. Is that?
We've been accused of that, but that's not our track record. We're consistently reducing taxes. What we're doing are reducing taxes that will hit more Alabamians, and will be hit people that are not impacted by the overtime tax. We also, I don't have any evidence or any hard evidence to support, but we're concerned too about just some of the overtime numbers. The numbers don't really seem to make sense. We've had some reports of maybe some things that concern us about the way it's being utilized. So I think it gives us time to evaluate that and see if it's really being proper. Now again, and we hear from businesses too a lot, they're still having challenges with how to track this and implement it. And so if we get the movement at the federal front, that will open, I think, the door to a lot of states doing things. Interesting enough, we were the first state, including the federal government, to do this overtime tax exemption. I thought it was a great idea. I was a co-sponsor. The speaker was a co-sponsor. But now that it's turned out to be what it is, we're reevaluating that and need to continue to evaluate it. But there were other states that thought this was a good idea and looked at what's happened, and they've all backed off now.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
okay, so they saw that. Oh, wait. They overshot the runway a little bit. And so
we're not about increasing taxes. Anybody who says that is just not reporting what's actually happened. We're continuing to reduce taxes. We'll continue to do that. And by the way, we already have the lowest taxes in the country. If you took the tax structure of Mississippi and overlaid it into Alabama's, replaced it with Alabama in Alabama, we would have $1.1 billion more in revenue. If you took Florida's tax structure, we'd have another $1.5 billion revenue. Took Georgia's $1.6 billion.
They have higher property taxes, gambling, stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, property in Florida, you get about 35% of their revenue comes from property taxes. In Alabama, it's 15%. And of course, in Alabama, we can only raise property taxes by the vote of the people. So we have some nuances and things that we're limited by, but also our tax structure, we need to continuously improve. But we just want to understand, we are already a low tax state. Now, we'd love to improve, and we're going to continue to do that, make it lower. But
it sounds strategic rather than, I think you said scalpel rather than broadsword.
Yeah. I mean, they're right now in D.C. They're taking a wrecking ball, and they should, because they're spending way beyond their means. They've got trillions of dollars of debt. They've got all this. We do not have that same situation here. We have to balance our budget per the Constitution, but we've created reserves. We've avoided proration for 14 years because of our budgeting approach. We're not spending everything we get. We could, but we don't. So we're being fiscally responsible and lowering taxes in the process.
I do want to get to the federal government and how that might apply to some state initiatives, but let's talk about the education budget real quick. It starts in the Senate this year. Y'all always kind of flip-flop that, and so that's interesting. But as it moves forward, I guess it'll probably be after spring break as the budgets kind of start going. There are two issues on the table right now that could impact the budget. One is workers' comp for teachers and other education workers. That seems to be popular. I think it was unanimous in the Senate. Also, parental leave for teachers and education workers. It's also for state employees, but as it pertains to the education budget. They're very popular policies, but they're going to cost something. And I'm curious if the ETF as it is right now, as it is going forward, can we handle those additional costs? Because those are long-term policies.
Well, in the ETF, because of the way we budgeted and because of the reserves we set up and because we've actually limited our budget growth every year, next year the ETF can only grow 6%. The following year can only grow 5.75%. So any revenue we have over that will then go into various reserve accounts. So we've allotted for growth in the budget, but also limitation in spending. Now, yes, we can afford things. The question is how much of those fiscal notes? And what we don't have a good grip on right now is what is the fiscal note for either of those two items. We kind of know individually, but the question is how many teachers are going to take advantage of that, and that's kind of something we're still working on. I spoke with the governor's office yesterday, and so I'd like to have some more information about that. We did pass that out of our committee today, but moving forward, we're going to need to see some more information on that. Workers' comp. That's one where we do have a fiscal note, but there's a difference of opinion about what that could be. So we need to resolve that. Obviously, with the overtime situation, I'm a little bit sensitive to fiscal notes.
Not just you. I think everybody's like, okay, wait, let's make sure we have the data.
Yeah. So they're good concepts. They're good. I mean, I don't oppose the idea, but we do want to make sure we're affordable. And what we're doing too with a lot of these tax credits and things we're doing, we're making sure that our budget, our revenue stream going forward, we're going to be able to, growth will kind of cover some of these. we've got some reserves. We'll draw down reserves. We're going to draw down from some this session as well. But yeah, those are two issues that will be impactful to the budget. I don't know how much. There's a lot of support for the concept, but I think at the end of the day, now in the House, since both now will be in the House, we have to determine if we're comfortable with the fiscal note and the risk. Obviously, those are two that we may not have. We have to see about the sunset. The maternity leave issue probably won't be a sunset type issue, but those are things we got to marinate a little bit more on those.
Well, that's why I asked, because like you said, popular, but unlike the federal government, federal government can, Congress can pass a policy like that, put it on the credit card, the debt goes up, and nobody knows the difference. Y'all have to balance budgets. It's a lot different, and it could lead to a proration down the road. I mean, maybe not that extreme, but budget problems down the road. All right, speaking of that, I wanted to get to this. You wrote this op-ed about Doge in Alabama. And we've had this concept around for a while. The Commission on Evaluation Services has been around since 2019. Their job has been to go and evaluate different state agencies, see about waste, fraud, and abuse, things like that, or just inefficiency. It doesn't have to be nefarious. Talk about why you penned this op-ed and what you want the people to know as they look at Washington and what's going on with all that and what they need to know about what's happening in state government.
Yeah. Well, the Republicans took over the legislature in the state in 2010. And from that time have made a lot of significant changes. Prior to that takeover, there had been, I think, 4 or 5 years of proration within a 10-year period. We have not had now proration in 14 years. We didn't have any reserves. We had $600 million of debt. We paid that debt back. We built reserve accounts. We've limited our budget growth. We've done some things such as creating this ACES group to help us do things. Now I want to say this was all done pre-Trump. So pre-Trump, we did critical race theory. Pre-Trump, we did DEI. Pre-Trump, we did an ACES commission, which is evaluating agencies and expenditures. Pre-Trump, we did sunset. So we're basically saying we're going to give you credit or tax exemption. It won't last forever. We'll reevaluate. You've seen this session recently where the Contract Review Committee and the Sunset Committee has looked at combining boards and agencies and commissions and restructuring, trying to deal with these efficiency issues. We've got a long way to go, but my point is we have already had those things in place. Now, when you look at the situation in Washington and where we have now paid off our debt. We now have reserves. We actually are looking at getting better scoring from the credit agencies because of our fiscal situation we have today. D.C. has got a whole lot of problems. They're spending money they don't have. They're running deficits, running up deficits. I read the other day that interest is more than the entire defense budget.
That's right.
And we don't have those issues here. We have things we're evaluating going forward. But like for example, with ACES, they're working with Chairman Orr and I on. We want to know money that we've previously appropriated to an agency. We want to know how much money is in their bank account now because they haven't spent the money that we've allocated. Then we don't need to continue appropriating money. I'll give you an example. Several years ago, when we set up the Numeracy Act, we needed some funding for that, and that was important to do that. We set that up and really realized that we had, because of ACES and some of the other numbers, we realized we had additional money in the TEAMS program. We had overfunded that TEAMS program, which was the math and science teacher program. And so we took $20 million to start the Numeracy Act. And look what's happened just in a very short few years. We are one of the only states that showed improvement in math scores post-COVID. So my point in that article was this: Republicans have taken over the legislature. We have done a lot of these fundamentally fiscally responsible conservative things that you would do in a business. And we're not taking a wrecking ball necessarily. We're doing the scalpel. We only have 30 days too. We don't meet every day, so we've got a limited amount of time to implement these things. But that's our mindset. And we've been very successful. We've had tax cuts. We've created reserves. We're in good financial shape. And again, if we can get the improvement in our credit scoring by the rating agencies, that will help our interest going forward, our borrowing capacity going forward. So the point of that was to show, kind of highlight what we've done under Republican leadership. We'll continue to do that. Nobody denies there's money to find. There's money to be. We can be more efficient. We're in a bureaucracy, but we've done some things. We're continuing on that road, and we want to. That's our mindset.
We'll leave it there. And look, we're going to be following these tax cut bills certainly the education budget, as it moves forward and the different pay-fors there, and the DOGE situation as always. But Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time, and we'll see you after spring break.
Well, thank you very much.
We'll be right back.
Created by the U.S. Congress on May 18, 1933, the Tennessee Valley Authority, or TVA, is the nation's largest public power company and a world-renowned regional development agency. It operates hydroelectric dams and coal-fired and nuclear power plants in northern Alabama and other southern states. TVA also manages the Tennessee River for flood control, navigation, recreation, and water quality.
Before we go, allow me to brag on our APT team. The latest Nielsen ratings are in, and Alabama Public Television saw a 60% increase in average monthly reach in the month of December, bolstered in part by the Super 7 football championship games. But more broadly, APT's viewership was up from an average of 1.25 million unique viewers in December of 2023 to 1.5 million in 2024. That's a 21% growth in reach. Kudos to the great work of our entire team here at Alabama Public Television, and thank you for trusting us with your viewership. And that's our show for this week. Thanks for watching. The legislature is out of session next week, so we will pause our nightly coverage. Capitol Journal will return next week at the usual time here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capitol Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.